Charles Louis de Secondat is one of the most famous Enlightenment thinkers. He's actually better known as Montesquieu, which you may have heard before. He heavily influenced liberal political thinking. In fact, he influenced the American founders with his idea of the separation of powers into legislative, executive, and judicial branches. His main work is The Spirit of Laws, which we will be looking at today, as well as some of his other works and the history of his life. So please like, comment, and subscribe. Let me know what else you guys want to see. And also please go check out my website, westernrenaissance.com, where I have written versions of all my videos, as well as some of my own writing. So please let me know what you think, and enjoy. Charles was born January 19, 1689, at Le Brade, to a noble family which gave him a high station in life from the beginning. He was well educated, and earned a law degree from the University of Bordeaux in 1708. And started a promising law career in Paris. When his father passed away, he received a substantial estate which he had to oversee. He married Jeanne de Lartigue in 1715, and they had 3 children. Quoting from the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy, quote, "In 1716, he inherited from his uncle the title Baron de la Brade et de Montesquieu, and the office of President en Mortier in the Parliament of Bordeaux, which was at the time chiefly a judicial and administrative body. For the next 11 years, he presided over the Tournay, the Parliament's criminal division, in which capacity he heard legal proceedings, supervised prisons, and administered various punishments, including torture." End quote. He also was involved in the Academy and published regularly. In 1721, he published his work The Persian Letters, which brought him a little bit of fame. He soon sold his life interest in the office and left the Parliament and used the time to travel. During his travels, he was heavily influenced by the British political system. In 1731, Montesquieu began working on his masterpiece, The Spirit of Laws, and it took him 17 years to finish it. However, when it was released, it was an immediate hit. He published a few other works in his life, such as Considerations on the Causes of the Greatness of the Romans and Their Decline, Reflections on Universal Monarchy in Europe, and Dialogue between Sulla and Eucrates. Though these never reached the success of the Persian Letters or The Spirit of Laws. Montesquieu passed away in 1755 in Paris. Now we're going to take a brief look at his work, The Persian Letters. The Persian Letters was a novel which is made up of a series of letters written by 2 Persians named Uzbek and Rika. It tells a story of these 2 characters traveling to Europe and the way in which they struggle to understand a culture foreign to their own. It was widely popular because of its hilarity and its outsider's perspective on European culture. The audience laughed at the misinterpretation of these 2 characters' experiences in Europe, such as the way that they think the Pope is a wizard, but they also get a mirror held up to their own culture as the characters begin to understand Europe and are still totally confused by it. Montesquieu sneaks in a few of his own political views through one of his characters, such as his view that the best governments achieve their ends with the least force, and this flows from the natures of their populations. It also contains a dark story, which shows the jealousy of Uzbek, who has a harem full of wives, which live in fear of him, and he fears their infidelity. Eventually, infidelity does happen, and it leads to the suicide of his favorite wife. The novel ends here on a dark note, where a man who had everything becomes a despot through fear, and his nightmare becomes a reality. Next, we're going to take a look at his masterpiece, The Spirit of Laws. Montesquieu begins The Spirit of Laws with the observation that there are natural laws given by God, and no matter what, these are unchangeable by man. In fact, man himself is governed by the laws of human nature, regardless of any laws created by government. He calls laws created by the government positive laws, and these act to, quote, safeguard both the rights of the society as a whole and the rights of the individuals, both politically within society and civilly among themselves. To accomplish this balance, lawmakers must consider the nature of the government in which they operate, as well as the climate and terrain of their land. End quote. To Montesquieu, there are 3 different types of government: republican, monarchical, and despotic. Compare this to Aristotle's view of the 3 types of government being monarchy, aristocracy, and polity. Republican government is ruled by an aristocracy or a democracy. A monarchy is ruled by a monarch, but this monarch has to abide by established laws, and a despotic government is one in which a dictator is the law. Virtue is the guiding principle of a republican government, because if the people aren't virtuous, then the society will collapse. Honor drives monarchies, because the citizens are expected to maintain a code of honor in order for the hierarchies to be stable. Despots rule entirely by fear, because the people don't have a ruler to look up to as a source of honor, and being a virtuous citizen gets them nowhere. Education in the values of the state is essential for all governments, but not necessarily in the same way. For despots, propaganda is essential, so that the subjects will not question anything. Monarchies need to be educated by the example and honor of the monarch and other nobles. Classical education is fine, but is not as important as leading by example. In republics, education creates a civilizing effect and can help improve the virtues of the citizens, which is essential if the people are going to have some say in their governance. This leads us into the idea of the law, that, like education, should cultivate virtue in the populace. You can place restrictions on greed, violence, or any other vices that you wish for people to avoid. In monarchies, this is slightly different because you may want to give special titles and privileges to noble families in order to encourage their loyalty, since they will likely be quite powerful. This might stray into unfairness under the law in republican government, but it works well in monarchies. Despotic states don't really demand virtue from their citizens, just obedience, so they construct laws in ways which keep the people in their lanes. He then gives us an idea of how the court system may look under different types of government. Republics need a law that is airtight with punishment that fits the crime. You see a similar argument from Montesquieu that you find in Thomas More, about the way that if you give murderers and thieves the same punishment, then a robber is better off eliminating the victim of the robbery. That way there aren't any witnesses. Monarchies can have a little bit of deliberation about law, but in general, they also need to have strict laws. It is also essential that the monarch isn't actually a judge himself, otherwise he is a despot. As previously mentioned, despots rule by fear. Therefore, their punishments need to be severe, and they can often resort to torture to get results. Luxury is to be avoided in republics, because people getting jealous through inequality can lead to chaos. You can avoid this by having the wealthy pay the majority of the bill for public institutions or festivals. Monarchies can have larger gaps between the rich and poor, because monarchies need considerable hierarchy and rank. Despotic governments, of course, are going to have the vast majority of people living in abject poverty, and the small few living like gods. He does give us a bit of an aside on women, whom he believes need to either be controlled by social norms or personal restraint. That should be sufficient generally in monarchies and republics, so you don't have to necessarily use laws against them. As you can imagine, despotic governments would have almost no freedom for women. Each form of government has its own way of being corrupted. Democracy can easily sway into too little equality or too much equality. Too little equality turns the people against each other, where they may view their fellow citizens as enemies. And too much equality makes it so that no one is willing to be led or governed. Aristocracies can get corrupted when the powerful think themselves above the law. Monarchies can be corrupted if the monarch becomes too much of a tyrant, or if he commits too much to nepotism and not to merit. Despotic governments are built on corruption, and therefore are naturally built on unstable ground. Republics are naturally small, monarchies are naturally medium-sized, and despotic governments can be quite large. Since republics are small by nature, they need allies. Because of this, republics tend to find other republics to defend one another, and this brings about relative stability because you end up with a balance of power. Monarchies are slightly larger and need to have well-defined borders so they can't be larger than what the monarch can defend. Despotic governments tend towards having large tracts of empty land, which tire the enemy out before they actually meet any real combat. Monarchies and republics will sometimes conquer land in preemptive wars, and in those cases, they should be tolerant to the people that they conquer, and especially in the case of republics, they should extend rights to those people so that they may even have a preference for the new government. Despotic governments should send rulers in their stead to keep the people subjugated under their rule. The most stable governments, to Montesquieu, are separated into three divisions of government: an executive branch, a legislative branch, and a judiciary branch. This ought to be inherently true of republics. Monarchies can potentially achieve this as well, but of course, a despotic ruler acts as judge, jury, and executioner. Next, he discusses political liberty, which he believes cannot have a loose interpretation, or it can become despotic. He gives the example of the way that you shouldn't punish people for treason if they make no action towards the actual act. They simply say something negative about the government. He also doesn't like laws that punish people for crimes that no one is witness to, because this clearly can turn the people against one another. In regards to taxes, he believes that the amount of taxation needs to be negatively correlated to liberty. In other words, the freer the people are politically, the more you can tax them, because they will be inherently happier and less likely to rebel in a system with lots of liberty. If they are both unfree and taxed heavily, then they could try to flee or to have a revolution. His personal preference as far as a means of taxation is essentially a sales tax. Montesquieu also believes that climate affects the way that people behave. Colder climates create people that are tougher, but also less passionate and less violent. Warmer climates do the opposite. The laws of the nation should reflect these tendencies. He even believes that this can affect slavery because people in colder climates seem to have less slaves, thus slavery in cold climates was less natural. He also believed that men's access to divorce should correlate with women's freedom. The less freedom a woman has in society, the less able her husband should be to divorce her. He believed that monogamy laws could help tame passions. Terrain also affects the cultures of people, such as the way that Germanic peoples seemed to rely on kinship more than property rights, and they tended to use more of a bartering system because the land was quite hard to cultivate. Next, Montesquieu discusses his view on the spirit of the people, which is essentially the essence that makes them their own people. For instance, you couldn't ban the traditional dress of a people without getting massive pushback, or the way that the spirit of the Spartans was by nature warlike. His view of commerce is that republics tend to equalize imports and exports, whereas monarchies tend towards importation of luxury items. In general, he favors relatively free trade, and believes that this will benefit both the government and the people. Revolutions in economies take place when new technologies are introduced or when more luxury is afforded. For instance, the Greeks wouldn't have had the free times that they enjoyed to philosophize or make great art had they not had tremendous wealth. New technologies allow greater production or easier transportation. In regards to money, he seems to prefer real money, such as gold and silver, because of its stability, but ideal money, such as paper currency, can be useful as well. He makes a distinction between usury and interest. Interest, he believes, is essential, and will happen whether in a black market or the traditional market. Therefore, instead of allocating all interest to the black market, it is ideal to have some interest, but you should not let it get out of hand to where it becomes exploitative. Population, to Montesquieu, is very dependent on the type of society in which you're referring. Rome needed more people to fill its vast empire, whereas ancient Greece had an overcrowding problem in cities and didn't want to increase its population. The incentives that a government gives out to its citizens should reflect its necessities. In general, he is a fan of religion as a sort of glue that binds a nation together. Religious law is good for providing morals to the citizens, while civil law can get the specific principles of a society. When conquering a people, it's generally best to leave their religion intact because it's quite easy to stir up rebellion if you tear down the very fabric of their society. A separation of church and state, to some degree, allows different people to flourish together. In case you missed anything, here are a few key points from his works. The key points of his philosophy are: governments can be separated into republics, monarchies, and despotic governments. Republics can be further divided into democracies and aristocracies. These different types of government will need to be governed based on different principles. Governments govern best when they are divided into three branches: executive, legislative, and judicial. Humans have an essential human nature that guides them, which is created by God, and law must account for this. Outside of this human nature, humans changed based on their spirit, culture, climate, terrain, and more, and the law must also reflect that. Thank you all for watching. Please like, comment, subscribe, and check out my website, westernrenaissance.com. Thanks.